Grace twisted her bridal veil between nervous fingers, blinking back tears as she scanned the empty pews of the small wooden church in Cottonwood Creek, wondering how everything had gone so terribly wrong on what should have been the happiest day of her life. The year was 1876, and at 22 years old, Olivia Blackett found herself standing alone in her mother's altered wedding gown, waiting for a groom who would never come. The late afternoon sun streamed through the simple stained glass windows, casting colored patterns across the worn floorboards. Outside, a gentle June breeze rustled through the cottonwood trees that gave the town its name. The small frontier settlement in Wyoming territory was barely 15 years old, a collection of wooden buildings and hopeful souls carving out lives in the shadow of the majestic Bighorn Mountains. Olivia had been waiting for nearly 2 hours. The small gathering of townsfolk had slowly filtered out, offering pitying glances and awkward condolences. Even the minister, Reverend Harmon, had eventually excused himself to attend to other matters, promising to return should the groom appear. Only her closest friend, Martha Simmons, remained, sitting in the front pew with a sympathetic expression. "Perhaps something delayed him, Olivia," Martha offered, though her tone lacked conviction. Olivia shook her head, the pearl pins in her dark auburn hair catching the light. "Thomas isn't coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "His father never approved of me, said the daughter of a seamstress wasn't good enough for his son." Martha rose and approached her friend, taking Olivia's gloved hands in her own. "Then he's a fool, and you're better off without him." A commotion at the church entrance drew their attention. The heavy wooden doors swung open, flooding the dim interior with brilliant sunlight. Olivia's heart leapt, thinking Thomas had finally arrived, but the silhouette in the doorway belonged to someone else entirely. Nicholas Archer stood with his hat in his hands, backlit by the golden afternoon sun. His tall frame filled the doorway, broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist where a well-worn gun belt rested. His face, partially shadowed by the brim of the hat he held against his chest, bore the weathered lines of a man who spent his days under the open sky. "Begging your pardon, madam," he said, his voice deep and respectful as he stepped into the church. "I don't mean to intrude." Olivia quickly wiped away a stray tear. "The ceremony is, well, there isn't going to be a ceremony after all." Nicholas nodded slowly, his blue eyes taking in the scene: the bride in her white dress, the empty church, the unlit candles at the altar. "So I heard in town, folks are talking." Of course they were, Olivia thought bitterly. In a town the size of Cottonwood Creek, news, especially scandalous news, traveled faster than a prairie fire. "Mr. Archer," Martha acknowledged with a nod. "What brings you to church today? I don't believe I've ever seen you at Sunday service, let alone on a Saturday afternoon." Nicholas Archer was known throughout the territory as a skilled horseman and former cavalry scout who now worked as a rancher, having purchased a modest spread north of town 3 years prior. He kept mostly to himself, making trips into Cottonwood Creek only when necessary for supplies or business. "I came to deliver a message," he said, stepping further into the church. "Thomas Crawford won't be coming. His father put him on the eastbound train this morning, heading back to Boston." Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. Her worst fears confirmed, she sank onto the nearest pew. "He left," the words came out hollow. "Without a word." Nicholas's jaw tightened. "He tried to send word, wrote you a letter. His father intercepted it." He reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a crumpled envelope. "The station master is a friend. He saw what happened and managed to get this after old man Crawford tore it up." He handed the pieced-together letter to Olivia, who took it with trembling fingers. "How did you come to be the messenger?" Martha asked, suspicion evident in her tone. "I was delivering horses to the Crawford ranch when I overheard the argument." Nicholas shifted his weight. "Didn't seem right, leaving a bride waiting with no explanation." Olivia unfolded the letter, Thomas's familiar handwriting swimming before her eyes. "My dearest Olivia," it began. "By the time you read this, I will be on a train eastward. My father has made it clear that he will disown me and cut off all financial support to the ranch if I go through with our wedding. He has arranged a marriage for me in Boston with the daughter of his business partner. I am deeply sorry for the pain this must cause you. Please know that I did truly care for you. Yours, Thomas. The letter slipped from Olivia's fingers to the floor. Truly cared, she repeated numbly. Not loved, cared. Nicholas cleared his throat awkwardly. I should go. I just thought you deserved to know. Thank you, Mr. Archer, Martha said, moving to comfort her friend. It was decent of you to bring the news personally. He nodded, placing his hat back on his head. Miss Blackett, he said, tipping the brim slightly. For what it's worth, any man who'd leave like that doesn't deserve to stand beside you. With those words, he turned and walked back toward the church doors. Olivia watched him go, this quiet, strong man who had shown more consideration than her intended groom. Mr. Archer, she called suddenly, causing him to pause at the threshold. Would you, she faltered, gathering her courage, would you mind escorting us back to town? I'd rather not face everyone alone. Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or something deeper. He nodded once. I'd be honored, madam. Outside the church, the small gathering of townsfolk who had lingered to gossip quickly dispersed at Nicholas's stern glance. He helped Olivia into her friend's wagon, then mounted his own horse, a magnificent chestnut gelding that stood at least 16 hands high. My father's shop is just past the general store, Olivia directed, clutching her skirts to keep them from trailing in the dirt. The shame of returning to town in her wedding dress, clearly abandoned, threatened to overwhelm her. As they approached the main street, curious faces appeared in shop windows. Olivia held her head high, though inside she was crumbling. Nicholas rode slightly ahead, his presence somehow making the ordeal more bearable. Olivia's father, Henry Blackett, was waiting outside his tailor's shop, anxiety etched into his kind face. At 53, he had raised Olivia alone since her mother's death 10 years earlier. When he spotted his daughter returning in the wagon rather than in a carriage with her new husband, his expression fell. Olivia, he said, hurrying to help her down. What's happened? Where's Thomas? Gone, Papa, she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. Back to Boston. It seems I wasn't good enough for the Crawfords after all. Henry's face darkened with anger. That coward. After all his promises, Mr. Blackett, Nicholas interrupted, dismounting in one fluid motion. Your daughter has shown remarkable dignity today. You should be proud. Henry looked up at the tall rancher, recognition dawning. Mr. Archer, isn't it? From the north property, Nicholas nodded, extending his hand. Yes, sir. I happened to be at the Crawford Ranch when young Thomas was sent away. Thought Miss Blackett deserved to know the truth. Henry shook the offered hand firmly. Thank you for seeing my daughter home safely. It was the least I could do. Martha, who had been driving the wagon, cleared her throat. We should get Olivia inside, away from prying eyes. Indeed, a small crowd had begun to gather, keeping a respectful distance but clearly interested in the drama unfolding. Of course, Henry said, putting a protective arm around his daughter's shoulders. Nicholas tipped his hat. Miss Blackett, Mr. Blackett. If you need anything, don't hesitate to send word to my ranch. Olivia looked up at him, truly seeing him for perhaps the first time. His eyes were the deep blue of a mountain lake, set in a face tanned and lined from years in the sun. A small scar bisected his right eyebrow, and his dark hair curled slightly where it extended below his hat. There was something solid about him, something reliable that Thomas, for all his polished manners, had lacked. Thank you, Mr. Archer, she said softly, for everything. He held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then nodded and mounted his horse. They watched as he rode away, his straight back and broad shoulders silhouetted against the setting sun. Come inside, Livy, her father said gently, using her childhood nickname. Let's get you out of that dress. The days that followed were a blur of humiliation and heartache for Olivia. Though many in town expressed sympathy, she could feel the undercurrent of gossip, the sidelong glances and hushed conversations that stopped when she approached. She threw herself into her work at her father's shop, grateful for the distraction of needle and thread. A week after the failed wedding, Nicholas Archer appeared at the tailor shop door, hat in hand once again. Olivia, who was alone minding the store while her father made a delivery, felt her heart skip at the sight of him. "Mr. Archer," she greeted, setting aside the shirt she was mending. "What brings you to town, Miss Blackett?" he nodded, stepping inside the small but neat shop. "I find myself in need of a new shirt or two. Thought I might give your father's establishment my business." Olivia gestured to the bolts of fabric along one wall. "We'd be happy to help. Did you have a particular material in mind?" Nicholas ran a hand through his dark hair, looking slightly uncomfortable. "To be honest, I know little about such things. I trust your judgment," she smiled, the first genuine smile since the wedding day disaster. "Well then, let me show you what might be suitable for a rancher who spends his days in the saddle." As she moved around the shop, selecting fabrics and discussing options, Olivia found herself relaxing in Nicholas's presence. Unlike many men she knew, he listened attentively and seemed genuinely interested in her opinions. "My father taught me everything about tailoring," she explained as she measured Nicholas's broad shoulders, trying to maintain a professional demeanor despite their proximity. "My mother was the seamstress, but after she passed, I took over that part of the business." "You're good at it," he observed. "I've seen your work on the dresses some of the town ladies wear to Sunday service." Olivia looked up in surprise. "I thought you didn't attend church." A faint smile touched his lips. "I observe from afar sometimes." Something in his tone made her wonder if he was speaking about more than just church attendance. She felt a warmth creep into her cheeks and busied herself with writing down his measurements. "These should be ready in about a week," she said, avoiding his gaze. "Will that suit you?" "Perfectly," he replied, placing coins on the counter. "And Miss Blackett, I was wondering if you might consider joining me for dinner at the hotel restaurant this Saturday evening." Olivia froze, the invitation hanging in the air between them. "Mr. Archer, Nicholas," he corrected gently, "and it's just dinner. No expectations." She hesitated, aware of how it might look accepting a dinner invitation so soon after being jilted. But something about Nicholas Archer made her want to accept, propriety be damned. "Very well, Nicholas. I would be pleased to join you for dinner." His smile transformed his face, softening the weathered lines and lighting his blue eyes. "I'll call for you at 6 then." After he left, Olivia pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks, wondering what she had just agreed to and why the prospect filled her with such unexpected anticipation. Saturday evening arrived, and with it came a flutter of nerves Olivia hadn't experienced since her first dance with Thomas Crawford. She chose a simple blue dress that complemented her auburn hair and fair complexion, deliberately avoiding anything that might remind her of her wedding day. Her father watched her preparations with a mixture of concern and approval. "Nicholas Archer seems a decent man," he observed. "Keeps to himself mostly, but folks speak well of him. Honest in his dealings, they say." "It's just dinner, Papa," Olivia reminded him, though she found herself hoping it might be more. Nicholas arrived precisely at 6, dressed in clean dark trousers and a new shirt that Olivia recognized as one from their shop, though she hadn't made it herself. His usual gun belt was absent, replaced by a simpler leather belt, and his boots had been polished to a shine. "You look beautiful," he said simply as she opened the door. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy. "You clean up rather well yourself." The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Cottonwood Creek, which wasn't saying much by Eastern standards, but represented luxury on the frontier. As they entered, Olivia felt the stares of the other diners and heard the murmur of conversation drop momentarily before resuming with increased intensity. Nicholas placed a reassuring hand at the small of her back, guiding her to a table near the window. "Ignore them," he said quietly. "They'll find something new to gossip about soon enough." Throughout dinner, Nicholas proved to be a surprisingly good conversationalist for a man reputed to be so solitary. He told her about his years in the cavalry, scouting for the army during the early settlement days of the territory. He spoke of his small ranch and the horses he bred, his face animated with passion for his work. In turn, Olivia shared stories of growing up in Cottonwood Creek, watching the town grow from a handful of buildings to the thriving community it was now becoming. She spoke of her dreams to expand the tailor shop, perhaps adding a dedicated dressmaking section. "Why did you never marry?" she asked eventually, curiosity overcoming propriety. "Surely there have been interested ladies." Nicholas's expression grew thoughtful. "I suppose I never found the right woman, or perhaps I did, but the timing was wrong." He looked at her directly. "Until recently?" The implication hung between them, neither acknowledging it fully but both aware of its presence. As they walked back to her father's shop after dinner, Nicholas offered his arm, which Olivia accepted. The evening air was cool, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I enjoyed this evening," she said softly. "As did I," he replied. "Perhaps we could do it again sometime." Olivia nodded, surprising herself with her eagerness. "I'd like that." At her door, Nicholas hesitated, then bent slightly to kiss her cheek, his lips warm against her skin. "Good night, Olivia." "Good night, Nicholas," she whispered, watching as he walked away, his tall figure disappearing into the gathering darkness. Over the following weeks, Nicholas became a regular visitor to town and to the tailor shop specifically. Sometimes he brought legitimate business, a tear that needed mending, a button to replace, but increasingly, he simply came to see Olivia. They developed a routine of Saturday evening dinners, followed by walks along the creek that gave the town its name. July turned to August, and the summer heat baked the wooden buildings of Cottonwood Creek. Olivia found herself looking forward to Nicholas's visits with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. The pain of Thomas's abandonment faded, replaced by a growing affection for this quiet, steady man who showed her with every action what true regard looked like. One particularly hot Sunday afternoon, Nicholas invited Olivia to ride out to his ranch. With her father's somewhat reluctant permission, she accepted, excited to see the place Nicholas spoke of so often. The Archer Ranch was modest by Wyoming standards, a few hundred acres of good grazing land with a small but well-built cabin, barn, and corral. What made it special were the horses. Nicholas had an eye for horseflesh and had built up a small but impressive herd of breeding stock. "They're beautiful," Olivia marveled as Nicholas showed her around the property, introducing her to each horse by name. "This one's special," he said, leading her to a stall where a black mare stood with a gangly foal at her side. "Born just last week. I was thinking of calling her Starlight for the white mark on her forehead." Olivia watched as he gently stroked the foal's neck, his big hands incredibly tender with the young animal. She felt something shift within her heart, a certainty taking root. After showing her the horses, Nicholas led her to a small rise behind the cabin where a lone cottonwood tree provided shade. From this vantage point, they could see the rolling hills of his property and, in the distance, the mountains rising blue and majestic. "It's not much," he said, gesturing to the vista before them, "but it's mine, paid for free and clear last year." "It's wonderful," Olivia replied honestly. "You've built something real here, Nicholas, something lasting." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes serious. "I'd like to build more. A bigger cabin, perhaps, room for a family someday." Olivia's heart quickened. "That sounds like a fine dream." "It doesn't have to be just a dream," he said quietly, taking her hand in his. "Olivia, I know it hasn't been long since what happened, and I'm not asking for an answer today. But I want you to know that I'm falling in love with you. Have been since I saw you standing alone in that church, more beautiful and brave than any woman has a right to be." Tears sprang to Olivia's eyes, not of sorrow but of unexpected joy. "Nicholas, you don't need to say anything now," he assured her, squeezing her hand gently. Just think about it. Think about whether you could see yourself here with me." She looked around at the small ranch, the horses grazing peacefully in the distance, the sturdy cabin that could indeed be expanded for a growing family. Then she looked at Nicholas, his face earnest and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "I don't need to think about it," she said with sudden clarity. "I already know. Yes, Nicholas, I can see myself here, with you." His face broke into a smile of such pure happiness that it took her breath away. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. Unlike Thomas's kisses, which had always felt somewhat perfunctory, Nicholas's kiss was warm and tender, conveying emotions too deep for words. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Nicholas kept his arms around her. "I should get you back to town before your father sends out a search party." Olivia laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "Yes, we should go, but we'll come back soon, as often as you like," he promised. "This could be your home too, Olivia, if you want it to be." The ride back to town was filled with plans and possibilities, the future suddenly spreading before them bright with promise. As August turned to September, Olivia and Nicholas's courtship became the talk of Cottonwood Creek, though for once the gossip was largely positive. The town had witnessed Olivia's heartbreak and seemed collectively pleased to see her happiness now with a man widely regarded as honorable and hardworking. They set a wedding date for October, when the summer heat would have faded but before the harsh Wyoming winter set in. Olivia, determined to avoid the elaborate plans that had ended so disastrously with Thomas, opted for a simple ceremony with only close friends and family. "Are you sure you want to use the church?" her father asked as they discussed arrangements. "After what happened?" "I'm sure," Olivia said firmly. "I won't let what Thomas did taint that place for me. Besides, it's the only proper church in town." Henry studied his daughter's face, seeing the strength that had always been there but had somehow deepened in recent months. "You've changed, Livy," she smiled. "For the better, I hope." "Definitely for the better. Nicholas Archer is a lucky man." 2 weeks before the wedding, disaster struck. A telegram arrived from the territorial capital with news that shook Cottonwood Creek. Thomas Crawford was returning, and he wasn't coming alone. His father, Elijah Crawford, one of the wealthiest men in the territory and owner of the largest cattle ranch outside of town, was accompanying him. The news reached Olivia through Martha, who burst into the tailor shop one morning, breathless with excitement. "They say old man Crawford is ill," Martha reported, lowering her voice though they were alone in the shop. "Apparently he's had a change of heart about his son's marriage prospects and wants to make amends before he dies." Olivia's hands stilled on the wedding dress she was altering for herself. "What does that have to do with me?" Martha's expression turned sympathetic. "The rumor is that Thomas is coming to ask for your forgiveness and your hand." For a moment, Olivia couldn't speak. The possibility of Thomas's return had never occurred to her. She had mourned that relationship, grieved it, and moved on. "It doesn't matter," she said finally. "I'm marrying Nicholas in 2 weeks." "Of course," Martha agreed quickly. "I just thought you should know before they arrive tomorrow." Olivia nodded, grateful for the warning but unsettled nonetheless. That evening, when Nicholas came to escort her for their usual Saturday dinner, she told him about Thomas's impending return. Nicholas listened quietly, his expression giving little away. When she finished, he asked simply, "Does this change anything for you?" Olivia reached for his hand across the table. "Nothing. I love you, Nicholas. What I felt for Thomas wasn't love. I see that now. It was the idea of marriage, of having what my parents had, but with you, it's real." Relief softened his features. "I trust you, Olivia, but I won't lie, I'm not looking forward to seeing Crawford in town." The next day, the Crawford men arrived in Cottonwood Creek in a fancy carriage, causing quite a stir among the townspeople. Elijah Crawford did indeed look ill, his once robust frame gaunt and his face gray beneath his expensive suit. Thomas, by contrast, appeared much as Olivia remembered, handsome in a polished way, with golden hair and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to privilege. Olivia was in the shop with her father when the bell over the door jingled and Thomas stepped inside. He removed his hat, revealing slightly longer hair than he'd worn before, styled in the Eastern fashion. "Olivia," he said, his voice as smooth as she remembered. "You look well." Henry Blackett stepped protectively in front of his daughter. "Mr. Crawford, you have some nerve showing your face here after what you did." Thomas had the grace to look abashed. "Mr. Blackett, I deserve your anger. What I did was unforgivable, but I've come to make it right." Olivia moved to stand beside her father. "There's nothing to make right, Thomas. What's done is done." "Please, Olivia," Thomas implored, taking a step forward. "Just hear me out. My father is dying. He realizes now the mistake he made in separating us. He's given his blessing for our marriage. In fact, he insists upon it. He wants to see me settled before he passes." Henry snorted. "How convenient for him. And what about the Boston girl you were supposed to marry?" A flash of irritation crossed Thomas's face before he composed himself. "That arrangement didn't work out, but it's for the best. I never stopped thinking about you, Olivia. We can still have the future we planned." "No, Thomas, we can't," Olivia said firmly. "I'm engaged to be married to someone else." Thomas stared at her in genuine shock. "What, to whom?" "Nicholas Archer," she replied, unable to keep a note of pride from her voice. "We're to be married in 2 weeks. The rancher." Thomas's surprise turned to disbelief. "Olivia, you can't be serious. You would choose a simple horse breeder over me. My father's ranch is the largest in the territory. You would want for nothing as my wife." "Except respect," Olivia countered, "and love. Nicholas offers both in abundance." Thomas's expression hardened. "This is absurd. You're clearly still upset about what happened, I understand that, but surely you can see that this rebound attachment isn't the same as what we had." "You're right," Olivia agreed, surprising him. "It's not the same, it's real and it's lasting. What we had was a girl's fantasy and a man's convenience. Please leave, Thomas, there's nothing for you here." For a moment, it seemed Thomas might argue further, but the determined set of Olivia's jaw must have convinced him of the futility. He replaced his hat and turned to go, pausing with his hand on the doorknob. "My father won't accept this easily," he warned. "He came here with a purpose, and Elijah Crawford isn't accustomed to being thwarted." After he left, Henry put an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "I'm proud of you, Livy, and a little worried. The Crawfords have a lot of influence in this territory." "What can they do?" Olivia asked. "I'm free to marry whom I choose." But over the next few days, it became clear that the Crawfords could do quite a lot. Suddenly, Nicholas found his business dealings in town becoming more difficult. The bank, where Elijah Crawford was a major investor, began questioning the loan Nicholas had taken for expanding his breeding stock. The general store, which relied on Crawford business, became reluctant to extend him the usual credit. Most concerning was the rumor that began circulating about Nicholas's past. Whispers that he'd been dishonorably discharged from the cavalry, that he'd killed a man in a dispute over a woman back east, that his ranch land had been acquired through questionable means. Nicholas bore it all with stoic dignity, neither confirming nor denying the rumors when confronted. But Olivia could see the toll it was taking on him. "They're trying to run you out of town," she said one evening as they sat on the porch of her father's house. "Or at least delay our wedding." Nicholas nodded grimly. "Elijah Crawford is used to getting his way, but I'm not leaving, Olivia, and I'm not giving you up unless that's what you want." "Never," she said fiercely, "but I hate what they're doing to your reputation." "Reputations can be rebuilt," he said, taking her hand. "As long as we have each other, the rest will sort itself out." 3 days before the wedding, Olivia received a formal invitation to dine at the Crawford Ranch. It was addressed to her alone, with a personal note from Elijah requesting the opportunity to make amends. "It's a trap," Henry insisted when she showed him the invitation. "They're trying to get you alone to pressure you. Or maybe Mr. Crawford truly is dying and wants to clear his conscience," Olivia suggested, though she shared her father's suspicions. "Let me come with you," Nicholas offered when she told him about the invitation. Or at least let me accompany you to the ranch and wait outside. Olivia shook her head. I need to face them on my own. Besides, if Mr. Crawford truly is dying, this may be my only chance to tell him exactly what I think of his interference in our lives. Despite their concerns, Olivia rode out to the Crawford ranch the following evening. The sprawling main house was imposing, built of actual stone rather than the wood that comprised most buildings in the territory. A servant showed her into a formal dining room where Elijah Crawford sat at the head of the table, with Thomas at his right hand. Miss Blackett, Elijah greeted her, rising slightly before sinking back into his chair. He did indeed look ill, his complexion waxy and his breathing labored. Thank you for accepting my invitation. Mr. Crawford, she acknowledged, taking the seat a servant pulled out for her. I must admit, I was curious about your sudden desire to make amends. Thomas shot her a warning glance, but Elijah merely laughed a dry sound that ended in a cough. Direct, just as Thomas described, the older man observed. I appreciate that quality, Miss Blackett. It's rare in young women. Throughout the elaborate dinner, served by silent servants on fine china that must have been brought at great expense from the East, Elijah Crawford proved to be an intelligent and surprisingly charming host. He asked Olivia about her work at the tailor shop, seeming genuinely interested in her descriptions of the business. It wasn't until dessert was served that he finally addressed the reason for her invitation. Miss Blackett, Olivia, if I may, I owe you an apology, he said, setting down his fork. My interference in your relationship with my son was high-handed and, as I've come to realize, misguided. Olivia studied the old man's face, looking for signs of deception but finding only weariness and what appeared to be genuine regret. I appreciate your apology, Mr. Crawford, she replied carefully. But as I've explained to Thomas, I've moved on. I'm engaged to marry Nicholas Archer, a good man who loves me and whom I love in return. Elijah nodded slowly. So I've heard. And that is precisely what I wish to discuss with you. He gestured to Thomas, who produced a document from beside his plate and slid it across the table to Olivia. What is this? She asked, not touching the paper. A deed, Elijah explained. To 1,000 acres adjoining my property to the east. Prime grazing land with good water access. It would be my wedding gift to you and Thomas. Olivia's confusion must have shown on her face, for Elijah continued, or if you prefer, it could be my wedding gift to you and Mr. Archer. Thomas started, clearly as surprised as Olivia. Father, Elijah held up a hand to silence his son. I'm dying, Olivia. The doctors give me a month, perhaps two. Before I go, I want to see my son happily settled. I thought that meant with you, but it seems I was too late in coming to that realization. If your heart truly belongs to Mr. Archer now, so be it. I don't understand, Olivia said slowly. First you try to ruin Nicholas's reputation and business in town, and now you offer us land as a wedding gift. A ghost of a smile touched Elijah's pale lips. Testing the man, my dear. If his attachment to you couldn't withstand a bit of gossip and financial pressure, he wouldn't be worthy of you. Anger flared in Olivia. That testing has caused real harm to a good man's standing in the community. Easily remedied, Elijah assured her. A few words from me at the right ears, and Mr. Archer will find himself more respected than ever. The question is, do you accept my offer? The land comes with no strings attached, other than my wish to attend your wedding, whomever you choose to marry. Olivia looked from Elijah to Thomas, whose expression was a mixture of resignation and lingering hope. She realized with sudden clarity that the old man had orchestrated this entire scenario, perhaps even Thomas's original abandonment, to satisfy himself about the suitability of his son's choice. It was manipulative and cruel, yet she couldn't deny that, in a twisted way, it had led her to true happiness with Nicholas. I will discuss your generous offer with my fiancé, she said finally, rising from the table. But understand this, Mr. Crawford, I will marry Nicholas Archer in 3 days' time, with or without your blessing or your land. Elijah Crawford's eyes sparkled with something like approval. As you should, my dear. A woman who knows her own mind is a treasure beyond price. I look forward to receiving my invitation. The morning of Olivia and Nicholas's wedding dawned clear and crisp, the October air carrying just a hint of the winter to come. In the small back room of the church, Olivia stood in her wedding dress, a simple creation of ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, made by her own hands. Her father had stepped out to speak with the minister, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Despite the drama of the past 2 weeks, everything was finally in place. After much discussion, she and Nicholas had decided to accept Elijah Crawford's wedding gift, seeing it as an opportunity to expand their ranch and build a secure future. True to his word, Elijah had publicly dismissed the rumors about Nicholas, even going so far as to seek him out at the saloon and shake his hand in front of the town's most notorious gossips. Thomas, to his credit, had accepted Olivia's decision with as much grace as could be expected. He'd even stopped by the shop the previous day to wish her happiness, though the regret in his eyes had been unmistakable. Now, as Olivia adjusted her veil in the small mirror, she felt nothing but certainty and joy. In just a few minutes, she would walk down the aisle to marry Nicholas Archer, beginning a life she could scarcely have imagined 4 months ago when she stood abandoned in this very church. A commotion outside the door drew her attention. She heard raised voices, then her father's alarmed call. "Olivia, come quickly!" Heart pounding, she hurried from the room and found her father in the vestibule, his face pale. "It's Nicholas," he said. "There's been an accident at the ranch. One of his hands just rode in with the news." "Is he?" Olivia couldn't finish the question, fear clutching at her throat. "He's alive," Henry assured her. "But injured. Thrown from a horse while trying to break a new stallion, they've taken him to Doc Miller's." Gathering her skirts, Olivia rushed from the church, her father close behind. Outside, the wedding guests were milling about in confusion. Martha broke away from the crowd to intercept them. "Olivia, what's happening? Where are you going?" "Nicholas is hurt," she explained breathlessly. "I have to go to him." Martha nodded in understanding. "I'll tell everyone, go." Doc Miller's office was at the far end of the main street. Olivia ran the entire way, heedless of the spectacle she made in her wedding dress. When she burst through the door, she found the doctor bent over a still figure on the examination table. "Nicholas!" she cried, rushing forward. Doc Miller looked up, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Miss Blackett, what are you doing here? Where is he?" Olivia demanded, looking around the small office in confusion. "Where's Nicholas?" The doctor's brow furrowed. "Nicholas Archer, I haven't seen him today." "This is young Billy Thompson. Broke his arm falling off the mercantile roof." Olivia stared in disbelief, her mind racing to make sense of the situation. "But we were told Nicholas had an accident at his ranch, that he was brought here." "First I've heard of it," Doc Miller said, returning his attention to setting Billy's arm, "and I'd certainly know if the man had been brought to me with injuries." It was a lie, Henry realized, coming up behind his daughter. Someone wanted to stop the wedding. Understanding dawned on Olivia. "Thomas," she whispered, then with mounting anger, "or his father." They hurried back to the church, where the confused wedding guests still waited. Olivia scanned the crowd but saw no sign of either Crawford. "Has anyone seen Thomas or Elijah Crawford?" she asked Martha. Her friend shook her head. "They weren't invited, were they?" "No," but Olivia broke off as a new thought struck her. "The ranch, if Nicholas isn't hurt, he'll be waiting at the church, but what if they've done something to delay him as well?" Without waiting for a response, Olivia hitched up her skirts and strode to where the horses were tethered. With her father's help, she mounted side saddle, a difficult feat in her wedding dress. "Olivia, wait," Henry called as she gathered the reins. "At least let me come with you." "No, Papa," she replied, determination hardening her voice. "Stay here. If Nicholas arrives, tell him where I've gone. I need to see for myself that he's safe." The ride to the Archer Ranch normally took about 40 minutes at a leisurely pace. Olivia made it in 25, pushing her horse as fast as she dared. As she crested the final rise, the ranch came into view below, peaceful in the morning sunlight. There was no sign of commotion or accident, but neither was there any sign of Nicholas or his horse. Heart-pounding, she rode into the yard and dismounted, calling for him. The ranch hand who emerged from the barn looked startled to see a woman in a wedding dress standing in the yard. "Madam, Miss Blackett, what are you doing here? Where's Nicholas?" she demanded. "Is he hurt?" The hand Jim, if she remembered correctly, shook his head in confusion. "The boss left for town over an hour ago, all dressed up for the wedding. Isn't he there?" Fear and anger warred within Olivia. "Someone lied to me about him being injured, and now he's missing between here and town." Jim's expression darkened. "The Crawford boy was here earlier asking about the boss, said he had a wedding gift to deliver personally." "Which way would Nicholas have ridden to town?" Olivia asked, already moving back to her horse. "The main trail, most likely. It's the fastest route." Olivia remounted, gathering her increasingly bedraggled skirts. "If Nicholas returns, tell him I'm looking for him." She set off down the main trail toward town, her eyes scanning the landscape for any sign of Nicholas. About halfway back, where the trail crossed a shallow creek, she spotted a familiar chestnut horse grazing freely by the water's edge. "Thunder," she called, recognizing Nicholas's favorite mount. The horse lifted its head, nickering softly in response. Dismounting quickly, Olivia searched the area, calling Nicholas's name. She found signs of a struggle: trampled grass, a broken branch leading away from the trail into a stand of cottonwood trees. Following the signs, she came upon a small clearing where Nicholas sat propped against a tree, his hands tied behind him and a cloth gag in his mouth. His eyes widened when he saw her, a mixture of relief and alarm in their blue depths. "Nicholas!" she cried, rushing to his side and pulling the gag from his mouth. "What happened? Who did this?" "Thomas Crawford," Nicholas growled as she worked to untie his hands. "Ambushed me on my way to the church, said if he couldn't have you, he'd make sure I'd miss the wedding too." Olivia's fingers fumbled with the tight knots. "That coward, is he still here?" "Rode off toward town after he tied me up. Said something about making sure you got the message that I wasn't coming." Nicholas winced as the ropes finally gave way, allowing him to bring his arms forward and massage his wrists. "How did you find me?" "There was a message at the church claiming you'd been injured and taken to the doctor. When I discovered that was a lie, I rode to the ranch looking for you." Olivia helped him to his feet, noting with dismay that his once immaculate suit was now dusty and torn at one sleeve. "Are you hurt?" Nicholas shook his head, a wry smile touching his lips despite the circumstances. "Only my pride and perhaps my appearance. I'm afraid I don't look much like a groom anymore." Olivia laughed, the sound tinged with relief and lingering anger. "And I'm hardly the picture of a pristine bride after galloping across the countryside." She gestured to her dress, now dust-stained and slightly torn at the hem. Nicholas reached out to touch her cheek, his expression growing serious. "You're the most beautiful bride I've ever seen, Olivia Blackett, and the bravest. Not many women would come charging to their groom's rescue on their wedding day." "Not many women love their grooms as much as I love you," she replied simply. They collected the horses and rode back toward town side by side, both somewhat worse for wear but more determined than ever to complete their interrupted ceremony. The small church was still full when they arrived, the wedding guests having been convinced by Henry and Martha to wait just a little longer. A murmur of surprise and relief rippled through the congregation as Olivia and Nicholas entered together, their appearance telling its own story. At the front of the church stood Thomas Crawford, apparently in the midst of addressing the gathered townspeople. He turned at their entrance, his face draining of color at the sight of Nicholas. "I believe you were about to announce that I wouldn't be coming," Nicholas said, his voice carrying in the suddenly silent church. "Seems your knot-tying skills need work, Crawford." Reverend Harmon stepped forward, confusion evident on his kindly face. "What is the meaning of this?" "Mr. Archer, Miss Blackett, we've been most concerned." Thomas Crawford tied Nicholas up to prevent him from reaching the church, Olivia explained, her voice shaking with anger. And then lied about an accident to lure me away as well. Gasps and murmurs filled the church. Thomas looked around desperately, seeking sympathy but finding only condemnation in the faces of the townsfolk. "Is this true, young man?" Reverend Harmon demanded, fixing Thomas with a stern gaze. Before Thomas could respond, the church doors opened once more to admit Elijah Crawford. The old man leaned heavily on a cane, his face ashen but his eyes sharp as they took in the scene. "Thomas," he said, his quiet voice somehow more damning than a shout. "What have you done?" Thomas's posture crumpled under his father's disappointed gaze. "I just wanted she was supposed to be Miss Blackett has made her choice," Elijah cut him off. "Your actions today have dishonored our family name and your own character." He turned to Nicholas and Olivia. "I offer my deepest apologies." "It seems my son has much to learn about accepting defeat graciously." With a firm hand on his son's shoulder, Elijah guided Thomas from the church. As they passed, the old man paused to address Olivia once more. "The land deed is still yours, Miss Blackett. Consider it compensation for my family's interference in your happiness." After the Crawfords departed, an awkward silence fell over the church. Reverend Harmon cleared his throat. "Perhaps, given the circumstances, we should reschedule the ceremony for another day." "No," Olivia said firmly, looking up at Nicholas. "We've waited long enough. Unless you'd prefer to postpone, Nicholas," he smiled down at her, his blue eyes warm with love. "I'd marry you right now if you were covered in mud from head to toe, Olivia Blackett." And so, with their clothes dusty and somewhat torn, with Olivia's carefully arranged hair falling loose around her shoulders and Nicholas sporting a bruised jaw from his encounter with Thomas, they took their places before the altar. As Reverend Harmon began the ceremony, Olivia looked around at the church, the same building where 4 months earlier she had stood alone, abandoned and heartbroken. Now it was filled with friends who had waited patiently for this moment. And beside her stood a man who had proven his love not with pretty words or promises, but with steadfast actions and unwavering commitment. When the time came to speak their vows, Nicholas's voice rang clear and true. "I, Nicholas Archer, take you, Olivia Blackett, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love and cherish you, to stand beside you in good times and in hard times, to build a home and a life with you for all the days that remain to us." Olivia's eyes filled with tears as she repeated similar words, her heart so full she could barely speak. When Reverend Harmon pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the congregation seemed to lift the very rafters of the little church. Nicholas's kiss was gentle but full of promise, a beginning rather than an ending. As they turned to face their friends as Mr. and Mrs. Archer, Olivia caught sight of her father wiping away a tear and Martha beaming with approval. Outside, the October sun was beginning its descent, bathing Cottonwood Creek in golden light. As they stepped from the church onto the dusty Main Street, Nicholas turned to his new wife. "Mrs. Archer," he said, testing the name with evident pleasure. "What do you say we start for home, our home?" Olivia looked up at her husband, this strong, steadfast man who had walked into a church 4 months ago and changed the course of her life forever. "Lead the way, Mr. Archer," she replied, taking his arm. "I believe we have a life to build together." And so they did, a life filled with hard work and simple pleasures, with the struggles and joys of ranching in the Wyoming territory. The land deed from Elijah Crawford allowed them to expand their horse breeding operation, eventually making the Archer Ranch one of the most respected in the territory. Olivia established a small dressmaking business on the property, creating wedding gowns for young women from miles around, each one sewn with care and blessed with the wisdom of her own unusual path to happiness. They raised 3 children in the expanded cabin that became a proper house over the years, 2 boys with their father's blue eyes and quiet strength, and a daughter with Olivia's auburn hair and determination. And every anniversary, Nicholas would bring Olivia a bouquet of wildflowers and remind her of the day he saw her standing alone in a church, waiting for a man who never came, and how grateful he was that fate had given him the chance to walk down that aisle and claim her as his bride.